Hey, hello everyone. I'm Andy from IES Inca and welcome all our IES members and also our guests today to join us for this webinar. Yeah, let me just share my slides. Today we have a very special guest, Eric Koo from IPOS International to share with us about this topic and cover your intangible assets potential. Yeah, so later I'll introduce him for a short 5 minutes. Please allow me to share a bit more about IES Inca for those who are new and also about IES. Yeah. Okay. So for today's program, we have the introduction to IES Inca, introduction to IPOS International and its services, the topic for today, and we'll have Q&A and some announcements to follow. Okay. For those who are new to us, IES is actually the Institution of Engineers Singapore. It is the national body for engineers here in Singapore, and we look after the engineers upgrading, engineers registries, and also the networking of engineers here. Okay. The mission of IES is to advance and promote the science, art, and profession of engineering for the well-being of mankind. The vision of IES is to be the heart and voice of engineers here in Singapore and to be the national body and home for engineers. Okay, this is our IES Council. Our current president is Dr. Richard Kwok. He's from the SMRT doing a lot of engineering work. And we have engineers of all different professions, disciplines, and also different sectors, government sector, private sector, and also academia. Yeah, representing different facets of engineering and to promote the growth of engineering. And that's IES. So extending from IES is IES Inca Incubator Accelerator. Our main role is to connect the entrepreneurs, technology entrepreneurs, mentors, and investors in the IES venture community to build sustainable and successful ventures. Yeah. Okay. And some of our achievements in the past 2 years, we started officially in July 2019, and we currently have 18 incubators, 80s we have supported, 80 plus mentors, 30 plus investors in our network, and also 700 plus people in our community that have attended our past events, engaged with us as IES Inca. And we continue to have many partners that support us and working closely with the industry and also the venture community. We also have other partners like NUS, Enterprise, Intuitive, A-Star to support the incubators in their growth. And we are also very keen to support engineering technology SMEs in their growth to become bigger and roll out new products. Okay, some of the events that we have done in the last 2 years, covering community events, mentor, networking sessions, community events to reach out to a wider audience of engineers, and also to bring attention to new areas of engineering and also share business knowledge. Yeah. Okay, currently, our board of directors, we have our chairman, engineer Chong Ki Sing, who's also a past president of IES. He's currently the IES chairman, Inca chairman, and engineer Edwin was our past chairman. Now he's our IES Inca advisor. We have a variety of engineers here supporting IES Inca's activities and also non-engineering business leaders who are advising us on the finance and business aspects. So IES Incubator, our role is to support IES members and engineers, corporate SME spin-offs, university poly spin-offs in engineering translation by providing mentorship and also business support training so that they can connect to customers, investors, and also business networks. Yeah. As a platform, we also help to curate the corporate SME problem statements, industry problem statements, and also innovation opportunities that engineers can take up and to build technology solutions around. Okay, some of the focus areas of IES Inca, we focus on infrastructure technology, building related materials, processes, and facilities management, IoT for industrial purpose and also smart cities, robotics automation, and also clean tech sustainability. These are areas that we want to see companies grow in. And companies who are in the stage of new tech venture where they have done customer discovery and validation, they have MVP, they want to scale up their business, they can be incubated by us. and teams exit incubation when they have a sustainable and executable business plan, and also the required funding to grow. Okay. Yeah, some of our key partners that we work closely with: Enterprise Singapore, IPI, A-Star, NUS, NTU, and one interesting partner we have is ISCA, Institute of Singapore Chartered Accountants, which has a lot of members in the finance and also accounting space who provide us finance mentors as well. And we have built up an investor network consisting of IES and members and ISCA members that has and also VC angel investors from our network to pledge 12.12 million to invest into these companies. And we also do not forget our engineering technology SMEs. We know that yes, they want to grow at times, but not sure how. So we actually build up a pool of consultants to support these companies. And you can sign up for a business review with them, and also consider whether you like to spin off new subsidiaries for going after innovation opportunities. So right now we have 2 consultants with us to support this, Randall and Patrick, who are available to hear your needs and also help you to brainstorm the future. So do sign up at this link. We'll be sending these slides to you later. And we also are running some courses coming up in the near future. On October 21st, we have technical selling to the engineering industry. And we have another course on technopreneurship for Deep Tech Ventures on 23rd November. So do sign up if you are interested. Yeah. So that's a brief introduction about IES Inca. We thank you for being here today. And I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, Eric. Yeah. Okay. So let me just pull up. Okay, so we are very fortunate to have Eric, who's the Deputy Director and heads the Global Engagement at IPOS International, the wholly owned subsidiary of the IPOS office. And then Eric oversees the expansion of IPOS International into key global markets, providing advisory and solutions to private enterprises and government on intellectual property creation, commercialization, and management. So Eric is also a fellow engineer from NTU and a graduate in IP and from NUS. Yeah, he's also a qualified project management professional and also a certified WSQ ACLP trainer. Wow, he has a lot of things he can do. So without further delay, we'd like to invite Eric to present to us on this topic. Over to you, Eric.
Okay, thanks so much, Andy, for the very kind introduction, and thank you all of you for attending today's session. So let me just pull up my slide very quickly. Okay, just wanted to check that everyone, you can see my slides properly.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks so much, Andy. All right. Again, thanks, Andy, for the introduction. So yes, my name is Eric Fu, and I head the global engagement for IPOS International. And also thank you very much to IES Inca for inviting me to speak on this topic here today, which is on know your intangible assets and find ways to monetize them. Okay, right. So just allow me a very quick plug in and spiel about who basically IPOS and IPOS International is, right? For those of you who are not familiar with us. Right, so IPOS is actually the government agency under the Ministry of Law. So it is a stat board that actually looks after IP laws and infrastructure. So it's also the place that you have to go to, right? If you need to file your trademark, your patent, your registered design protection, and so on and so forth. So IPOS really handles the more policy and the IP registration parts of the organization. And for IPOS International, which is where I'm from, we are actually a wholly owned subsidiary of actually IPOS. So you can look at us as the enterprise and expertise engagement arm of IPOS. So within IPOS International, we have about close to 150 people. Most of them are actually patent examiners. Okay. And what do we actually do in IPOS International? 3 key main things, starting from the left. It's actually number 1, advisory work. So we do actually provide advisory work for companies, SME startups, MNCs, and so on and so forth, in terms of helping them to understand and manage what their intangible assets and IP are. So that's the advisory piece. And then the middle side of the screen, We also provide what you call patent search and analysis services. So pretty much if you want to understand, to say, a technology field, and to say who are the key competitors to what you are actually inventing here today, who are the collaborators you can actually work with, which are the key technologies that's actually seeing a lot of ramp up in patenting activities and so on. So that's actually another thing that we can actually do for you, which is in terms of patent search and analysis. And finally, we also have a training arm, which is called the IP Academy. So within Academy itself, we offer anything from half-day trainings until a 2-year part-time master's program, which we actually co-run with the Singapore University of Social Sciences. Yeah. So just to give you a very quick overview about who IPOS and IPOS International is. Okay. Right. So moving on, the agenda for today is really just this couple of items over here. So we're going to talk about what are intangible assets and how they are actually important to you in your business. How do you then go about managing them? And finally, we're going to share some resources which are going to be useful for yourselves, enterprises, startups, as well as SMEs. Okay, I see that we have a kind of like a small and cozy group here today, right? So if any of you have any questions, right, just feel free to unmute yourself or just type it inside the chat box and stop me along the way. So we don't have to wait until my whole presentation. So any questions along the way, just feel free to shout out or just type it inside the chat box. All right. So moving on to the first topic, what are intangible assets? Right, so if you take a look at this slide, as the name suggests, right, intangible assets versus tangible assets, right? So tangible assets are what you can typically see, feel, and touch. So things like your land, your equipment, your machinery, your furniture, and so on and so forth. These are what we call the very tangible assets. And these are what is very typically seen inside your accountant's balance books. Now, as opposed to intangible assets, right, they tend to be something that you can't really touch, feel, or see. So things like your patents, your trademarks, your brand recognition, your customer list, and so on and so forth. So intangible, as the name actually suggests, very hard to touch, feel, or see. Now, another big differentiation between tangible and intangible assets is the fact that tangible assets can be and easily actually destroyed by acts of nature, right? So if you have machinery, you have furniture, you have inventory, you have a fire, you have a flood, this can actually get destroyed very easily. Versus intangible assets, they can't really be destroyed by acts of nature or acts of God. So that's another differentiation between tangible as well as intangible assets. The next concept I want to share with you for intangible assets is actually one that's a very powerful one. The fact is that for tangible assets, right, it can only be used typically by one party at a time. So let's take that example of a piece of land. So if you have a piece of land, you can build a factory on it, and perhaps you can, build a housing estate on it, and so on and so forth. But if you look at it, at any point of time, this piece of land, you can only have one purpose or one single use, right? So either a factory or a house, or maybe you could build a shopping mall. Now, as opposed to intangible assets, they are very divisible by nature. So what do I mean by that? So let's say if you have a patent, for example, a patent allows you to say, okay, I'm going to license to party A for a certain purpose. So let's say your patent is regarding to, let's say, water filtration technology. You can license to party A to say that, okay, for your case, I allow you to use this technology in the in the country of Singapore. And for another party, you can say, okay, outside of Singapore, you have the rights to actually use this technology. And another party, you could be saying that, okay, apart from using this particular technology for water filtration purposes, you can also use it in, let's say, refrigerators, because in the fridge as well, right, you need some kind of water filtration system, for example. So you can actually look at it in terms of devising or dividing it into different countries of use, different areas of applicational use. So there's actually many ways you can actually go and divide your intangible assets. You can also kind of like take a look and say, I want it to be exclusive with a certain party, and with another different party, I can have it to be non-exclusive. So intangible assets, I think that is a very important consideration, and a very important factor about intangible assets is the fact that the use of it can be licensed to many different parties. So once you have one single intangible asset, such as a patent and trademark and so forth, you can multiply and allow it to be used by many different parties at the same time. Okay, very quickly, I saw a question from Boon Kim, which says that what's the difference between R versus TM versus C? Okay, I'm assuming, Boon Kim, your question is that R actually, you're talking about registered trademarks versus TM is actually something that's actually not registered yet. So you can only use the R logo next to your trademark if it has been registered. So if you see TM, it means that you have the intention and you are using the trademark. It's just that it has not been registered yet. So C with the circle around it, it just means that it's actually a copyrighted material. Okay, so that's really just a label and to let the world know that you have certain protection over your different kinds of intangible assets. I hope that answers your question. All right. Okay, so moving on to the different kinds of intangible assets, right? So you may be more familiar with what we call the registrable or requires to be registered kind of intangible assets. So those in the orange bubbles that you see at the top of the screen. So this could be, your patents, your trademarks, and your registered designs. And these are the kinds of intangible assets that you actually need to file for a registration in order to get protection for it. Okay. So patents typically are going to be for, an exclusive right that's actually given to you for an invention. So the invention could be related to a product, or it could be related to a process or a new way of doing things. And it could also be a new way of, offering a solution to an existing problem. So that's what patents actually protect. And then moving on to trademarks, it's going to be a sign that is actually capable of distinguishing your goods and services from your competitors. Okay, so McDonald's, I think that's one of the very, very classic trademarks, which even the, 1 or 2 year old kid will recognize driving past a drive-thru. Okay, moving on, the third one is going to be for industrial designs. So industrial designs actually protect the visual appearance of your products or article, okay? So registered designs, typically you can actually find them being used to protect the appearances for, let's say, furniture, could be for cars, so automobiles, could be also be for furniture, okay? So things that have a very strong aesthetic outlook to it. Okay, so designs only protect the appearance and not the functionality. Okay, let me just repeat that. Registered designs only protect the appearance and not the functionality. Functionality is being protected by patents. Right, so we have these 3 different kinds of IP rights that you need to actually register. So patents, trademarks, and designs. Now, moving on to copyright. So copyright refers to the rights that, creators have over their literary and artistic work. So this can actually range anything from books to paintings to sculptures to films to movies to cable television programs to computer programs to data sets to advertisement and so on and so forth. So copyright actually is very, very wide-ranging. And the beauty about copyright is, at least in Singapore, you don't actually need to register it. Okay, so what do I mean by that? The moment you actually have your copyright, exist in a tangible form. So I think it's quite a bit of a irony over there, right? So you have to make copyright, which is in the intangible format, into a tangible format. So what do I mean by that? So that means the moment that your copyright exists in a writing, or that it exists into a performance, or that it exists into, let's say, a sculpture. So once it is actually being reduced into tangible form, copyright actually automatically exists from there. So you don't actually need to file for registration. The moment you have it put down into a tangible format, that's where you have copyright actually start to exist. Now, and for the last part, for IP assets, trade secrets, right? Now, of course, most of us will be very familiar with Coca-Cola, and of course, the supposed trade secret behind it that nobody actually knows what goes into the formulation of Coca-Cola. So trade secrets, or what we call trade secrets, right? These are basically information that's actually not made public. Okay, so the other term that we actually use trade secrets for, and sometimes a bit interchangeably, is confidential information. So these are information which is actually not made available to the public readily. Okay. So the top bar, as you see, the different kinds of orange bubbles over there, those are what we call your IP assets. But of course, within intangible assets itself, you have a much, much larger group of them. So things like your know-how. So like, if you are working in a consultancy company, you have the know-how of the different consultants who have actually worked with different, industries in the past. They know how certain procedures actually work better and what kind of things can actually work for a particular company that's actually undergoing some kind of a hardship and need to turn them around. So the know-how is actually something that resides in a person. And if you're a company like GE, who is very, very good at making systems and processes work even better, improving the productivity and so on. So they can actually apply these systems and processes from one production plant to the other production plant. And they know where to tweak, what are the buttons to push, what are the levers to pull in order for this to actually work from a different setting. So the system and processes that you have actually built out can also form your intangible assets. And of course, if you come from a pharmaceutical company such as Pfizer, regulatory approvals are going to be your key lifeblood. Why? Because without the approvals from locally HSA, or if you're from the US FDA, right? If you don't have the regulatory approvals from the relevant authorities, you cannot start to market and sell your drugs. So for pharmaceutical companies, regulatory approvals to them is their very important intangible assets. And of course, then moving on, you have domain names, as well as, if you are a data-heavy company such as Google or Facebook, right? Data is going to be your lifeline and your lifeblood. So as you can see, within intangible assets, there are what you need to be registered, those that don't need to be registered. And of course, outside of IP itself, there's a lot of other things which is forming this larger group of things, which is called intangible assets. So just bear in mind that when we talk about intangible assets, it's not really just patents and trademarks and so on. There's really a whole big classification over here waiting for you to explore. Okay, so I briefly talked about the different kinds of IP, and I thought this chart would be useful for you to very quickly, in a overview, understand the ease of protection, the duration, the scope, as well as the cost of obtaining the protection. Okay, let me just start very quickly from the top. So for copyrights, they're probably the easiest to get protected because, as I mentioned, right, once you have actually put them into a tangible format, they automatically exist. And the duration of the copyright is actually the life of the author plus 70 years. So yes, it's a very, very generous right that's actually being given. So that means once the author passes on, his kids and even his grandkids can still continue to enjoy the royalties taken from a copyright. Okay, and the cost to obtain it is basically negligible because you don't actually need to register for it. So moving down this chart, you'll see then for patents, right, it's arguably the most difficult to get protection simply because of the way in which patent applications are being written. So invariably, you'd actually need to hire a patent attorney or patent agent to actually help you to draft a patent application because of the way that it's being written. And I won't go into details, but just bear in mind that bulk of the cost for patents actually goes to your patent agent or patent attorney to help you to draft the patent application. So duration of a patent is 20 years. Of course, scope of protection is more technology related, and the cost is actually on one of the highest side of it. And I'll go into a bit more details about how much, kind of like give you a ballpark figure to say how much each, a trademark or a patent will actually cost you if you want to get the necessary protection for them. Okay. Right, so now that we have had a basic understanding of the different kinds of intangible assets, just bear in mind that even though the protection for them is kind of like, in a separate bubble, they can actually work hand in hand together in protecting one single product. Okay, so let me show you this as a very classic example. So I think some of you, myself included, actually have an espresso machine at home, right? So wonderful. Pop in a capsule every morning, you get this fragrant cup of coffee that comes out automatically and magically, right? So within this machine itself, you will see that there are many different forms of IP protection about it. So number one, starting from the left side of the slide, you have the trademark or the logo of Nespresso. That's actually being protected under trademark. And you look at then the next one, which is the milk frother, right? So that's where you pour in the milk so that it can actually create a nice cup of cappuccino with a foam at the top, right? So the milk frother, the shape itself is actually protected by a registered design. Now, the method of how is it that when you pop in a capsule, the coffee actually gets extracted and then spilled out into your cup, that is actually protected by a patent. And then, of course, you have marketing brochures that's being and advertisements as well. So that's being protected by copyright. What goes inside the capsule itself, right? So your different blends of Robusta and Arabica, coffee from the highlands of Kenya or Ethiopia and so on and so forth. What kind of coffee beans goes inside there and what kind of percentages, that is likely going to be a trade secret or confidential information. Okay, so as you can see, in one single successful product, you have many different layers of IP protection that goes about into protecting it. So this is on a patent kind of, on a product kind of a look. So assuming now today that you are in the business of, say, a telehealth startup, and I think this is quite hot in the past couple of months, simply because we have COVID, a lot of people are afraid to actually go to the clinics to even seek consultation because you're afraid of getting infected, right? So a lot of telehealth startups have actually started to spring up. And while you can see that there is no real physical product that the telehealth platform actually has, right? But what it has is actually a lot of different connections to different parties. So through the platform, the patient can then access to a panel of medical practitioners. And also through the platform, they will be able to get their medical records actually updated automatically and then get a prescription for the drugs and have it delivered to their home. So the platform itself is quite intangible in that sense, right? Because you don't actually have a physical product. But within this company, you can see that there are many different kinds of intangible assets that actually are residing in it. So number one, for example, you have your software, and there could be certain algorithms in there or certain calculations to say, okay, if I have a patient that comes in today, who is going to be the best practitioner that can actually match them to? So you have your software that can be a trade secret. And the know-how about the design of the software, right? So the UX, the UI, how to make the processes flow better. That is a know-how that actually lies with likely going to be your designers. And when you have many different telehealth startups competing for the same pie, right? How does one stand apart from the other? It could be cost. It could be that, your interface is a lot easier to use. And because, patients are typically, when they're distressed, right? The first thing they're looking for is that, how do I click a button and speak to someone very quickly? If you can make that so seamless and easy, that's going to be your know-how. And that's something that's very, very valuable to you. So the networks, I talked about it. And of course, then data. So you have your customer and patient data that actually comes in and flows into the platform. You're branding up the brand. So that's your trademark that's going to be helping you to protect that. And of course, your marketing collateral. So you have copyright that's actually going into that. So it's not only products that can have your IP protection. Even your business itself, right? As you can see from this example, there are many different kinds of intangible assets that can actually be very valuable to you. So you need to understand and know where these various kinds of intangible assets can reside within the company. Okay, so just to, so we talked about the telehealth startup. So now we want to talk about how intangible assets are important in your business. Strong intangible assets represent a strong barrier to entry. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. So if today you are, say, producing mask, okay, your facial mask to, it's not facial mask, right? The surgical mask to actually prevent the spread of COVID, right? If you have a mask that is actually being protected by, say, the material is some special material, you have patent protection for it, and when you market your mask, it's always under a certain brand name and people start to associate your mask with good quality, right? There's a trademark protection over it. So if you have different kinds of IP that actually comes in to protect your mask, you can increase your sales, and your sales can be actually sustained for a longer period of time because you have this different kinds of IP protection that prevents others from coming in and taking away your market share. Right? So strong intangible assets allow you to have a more sustained price premium, and you can delay the competition for a much longer period of time. Strong intangible assets also increase the opportunities for value creation. So what do I mean by that? Now, if you take a look at the leftmost side of the screen, right? If you have weak intangible assets, it just means that your potential monetization pathways is a lot narrower, as opposed to if you have a strong intangible asset, you have many possible ways of monetizing your IP or IA. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So if your IA is weak, it means that anybody can come in and take your market share, and you can only probably deploy your intangible assets in your own products. Now, if you have average intangible assets, right, you could then sell or perhaps even license to another competitor in the same space as you. If you have very strong intangible assets, right, you can also sell or license to other competitors in other spaces. Okay, so that's where your intangible assets can come in to play a very, very different role to you. So it's not just protecting your business anymore. It's even going into the offensive to say that, okay, I have intangible assets. How can I use these assets for licensing and selling to my competitors in my space, or even selling and licensing to competitors in outside of my space? Okay, so for example, if your mask has got that mask material that I talked about, right, is so special that it can not only be used in surgical masks, it can also be used in, say, air filtration devices. Okay, so you have air purifiers at home, that filtration can also be licensed to that particular kind of a use. So as you can see, with strong intangible assets, your monetization pathway then naturally opens up to you. All right, so we talked about, yes, the various kinds of IA and IP, and really what is the value that can be attributed to intangible assets. So let's take a look at this example. So this is actually a diagram that's taken out from a patent which actually belongs to Google, right? And this is the famous Google page ranking pattern, which is called a method for node ranking in a linked database. So this pattern was actually filed sometime back in January 1998. And back then, when this pattern was actually filed, it was a very different kind of way in which a search engine produces the results for you. So this particular pattern talks about how is it that having X number of connected sites to you gives it a higher attribution and thus a more relevant search result. And because of this, right, Google was actually able to build a search engine that the others couldn't actually catch up, because the relevancy of their search results was actually much, much more better. Okay, and this particular pattern, interestingly, was actually filed when the founders were actually still students with Stanford. Okay, so Larry Page and Sergey Brin, right? And because while they were still students in Stanford, when they filed for this patent application, it had to be filed under the name of Stanford. So in return, Stanford said that, okay, I know you guys are trying to build a search engine. I'm going to license this technology to you in return. And that was actually in exchange for, I think, about 1.8 million shares of Google, which at the point of time when Stanford actually sold off this 1.8 million shares, right, sometime in 2004 and 2005, it generated about $336 million worth of revenue for Stanford. So you can see in this example, just one single patent generated Stanford $336 million. Okay, so what about trademarks? Okay, so what you can see now on the screen is that a branded painkiller, Advil, on the left, versus a non-branded or a generic painkiller, which is on the right. The brand is called Exact. Okay, so Advil is actually a painkiller which is owned by Pfizer. And both Advil and the brand on the right, Exact, have the same active ingredient, which is ibuprofen. But if you take a look at the price, Advil costs $12.96 for 72 tablets, whereas the generic brand, same number of tablets, costs $9.99. And the interesting thing is you might be thinking, okay, maybe because Pfizer actually owns the patent to ibuprofen. No, it does not. So ibuprofen was actually developed by Boots UK sometime back in the 1960s. And they had a patent application or a patent actually granted for it. That patent has since expired. So there's actually no protection for ibuprofen anymore. But why is it that, Advil can carry this price premium over the generic brand? I would say primarily because it's down to its trademark or its brand. Because when you see Pfizer, you associate that, okay, it's a safe brand. It produces many drugs, Viagra being one of them. And of course, our vaccines that we've been taking recently as well, right? Pfizer, BioNTech. So because of the brand association, people are willing to pay more because they feel that, Advil is a brand that will actually do wonders for me when I'm in pain, and maybe not so much for Exact. And that's pretty much untrue because they have pretty much the same active ingredient in them. So the content is the same. It's just that, one is Advil, one is not. And Advil, because of the brand that has actually been built up over the decades, is able to command this price premium. Right, just to give you another example, and of course, when COVID started, right, everybody's rushing out to go and buy bleach to go and disinfect the house. So I took this off the NTUC website. So if you take a look, the bleach, the house brand for NTUC, right, it costs you about 62 cents per liter. Clorox, on the other hand, wow, brand name. People, when they hear Clorox, sure, good one. Any kind of germ also can kill. It will cost you $1.25 per liter. That's like double the premium. But in fact, again, what is the active ingredient? Sodium hydrochloride. So it's basically the same active ingredient. It's just that, Clorox has got a brand that's been built up over the decades. So people are willing to part away their money to pay for this brand association. Okay, so what about the values attributable to registered designs? I don't have the figures for you, but as you can see from this slide, the different kinds of designs that are classic designs that have been, produced along the years. So from your Charles Eames lounge chair to your Harley Davidson bike, and of course everybody will know the iPhone, to the now all of us are working from home, so we'll be buying higher end chairs such as Herman Miller Aeron chairs to actually make your bum feel more comfortable when you're seated for a long period of time, right? So all these are very classic designs, and let's just take a look at iPhone as well as Herman Miller chairs, right? They command a premium. Herman Miller chairs are talking about a few $1,000s. But that classic iconic design is so powerful that people are willing to actually pay for it. So if you take all this to combine collectively, right? Taking a look at the smartphone industry. Sorry, this slide is a bit old because we still have a Huawei example in here, but just to demonstrate the point, right? If you take a look at the cost of the materials versus the distribution and retail costs and other costs in there, right, such as R&D and so on, the cost collectively for each phone adds up to only about 60 odd, maybe about 60%. But the intangible value value of each smartphone. So that means the technology behind it, the brand that has been built up, the registered design that actually protects it, the copyright for all the advertising material, and of course, how your user interface is actually being built up and all this. That contributes to around 40% of the value of these three different brands, from Huawei to Samsung to Apple. So as you can see, in one single product, the intangible asset value in it can be almost as much as close to 50% for different kinds of brands. Okay, so that's just to give you a very quick understanding about what your intangible assets can mean for your company and your products. So don't underestimate or undermine their value. Right, so since intangible assets are so important, right, then of course you need to take a look and see, then how do I actually go about managing it? Because I need to manage it, otherwise I wouldn't know what's going to be in there, right? And I always like to bring out this example. So intangible asset management is actually not a new study or method, and there's no science about it. It's just that people don't give it the value that's actually required. So take a look at this PPT or this slide over here. When we buy monitors, we buy computers, we buy printers, and so on and so forth. Invariably in your company, there's going to be an asset tag, some kind of label that's going to be stuck to it. And they're going to track that, this is PC number 1 of 20 and so on and so forth. So you do this asset tagging. Why? Because you want to know what kind of physical assets you have in your company and residing in your office. So we do this a lot for not just computers and whatever, even for tables and chairs as well, right? So if we do that for your tangible assets, why are we not doing this more actively for intangible assets? It could be arguably because you don't see your intangible assets and hence you don't really actively tag it. Other reasons I've heard is that, patent, trademark, all this thing, we leave it to the lawyer, so they'll naturally go and tag it. But no, the lawyers, what they're involved in is that they will help you to get the necessary registrations. They will help you to reduce your risk, but the tagging of it, and of course, the tracking of where your assets are, that is something that has to be performed by, I don't know, it could be the lawyers themselves or it could be somebody else, but it has to be maintained properly. Because without understanding and knowing where tangible assets are, right, how are you going to make sure that you can get or milk as much value out of them as possible? So you need to categorize, you need to identify them, and you need to accord them with the necessary importance. Then that's where you can actually derive the value from them. Okay, so we talked about the managing of your IP and intangible assets, right? And that's something that should not be done in silo. Because when we talk about planning for IP, how is it that you want to file? How is it you want to protect? How is it that you want to monetize? How is it that you want to enforce? This should go hand in hand together with your business activities, okay? So for example, if you're identifying markets that you actually want to enter into, you also need to see what kind of relevant IP assets you have that can actually support this entering into the market. So let's say you are operating now in Singapore, you want to launch a product in Malaysia, for example. Then you have to make sure that, hey, when I go into Malaysia, right, if I launch the same product, will I be infringing on somebody else's right? The trademark that I actually want to use in Malaysia, has it been registered by someone else? Yeah, so those are the considerations you need to think about. And you can't just allow to say that, okay, I'm going to expand into certain markets and not think about the IP, because these two actually go hand in hand. So when you go down into, whether it's going to be a development of business strategy, so that's where you have to develop your IP strategy as well. When you are doing market adaptation, right? So certain products in a country sells good, you go to another country, you need to adopt or adapt it to the local markets and taste. Naturally, your IP protection, if it's originally for, let's say, Singapore, and then you go into another country, when your product is adapted, you also need to change your IP protection strategy for that adapted product for that market as well. Okay? And of course, very importantly is that if somebody else, when you start to operate in that market, starts to actually infringe on your IP rights, are you going to take the active step of enforcing your IP rights against them? Okay, so all this, as you can see, right, your IP strategy is not something that you leave it to your lawyers. It has to go in hand together with your whole business operations. Okay, hold on. Seems like I have a couple of questions. My favorite brand is Budget. Thanks, Andy. Is Pfizer a reliable brand? Well, I think if it can make things come to life through Viagra, I think it's probably one of the most reliable brands over there. Okay, so this slide, I would just like to share with you the concept of the innovation cycle, okay? Because a lot of times when we talk about hit products, so taking again, iPhone as a classic example, right? iPhone came out and it was a game changer. It was groundbreaking because before iPhone came out back in 2007, every single phone under there looks the same. They invariably had a physical keyboard. You could have a clamshell, you could have a physical kind of a tablet look, but they always had a keyboard. iPhone came out, no keyboard. Where did the keyboard go? Everything's on the screen. So that is actually what we call is a game-changing product. But how do you sustain this game-changing product over and over and over again? You cannot just rely on one single same product. You need to have innovations that come along it. So this innovation cycle is talking about IP is not just something that's legal-centric. It is also about business and innovation, okay? So when we talk about innovation, right, innovation is according to OECD's definition, right? It's about taking ideas to the market, okay? So if an idea, no matter how groundbreaking, right, it has to be brought to the market in order for it to have a social impact and in order for it to be defined as innovative. So if you have an idea that's actually not being applied to the market, then we can't really call it innovative. So when we actually studied various companies and even economies and countries around the world, right, it seems that there's actually this common innovation cycle or life cycle that we can actually see here on the screen. So it invariably always starts with your ideas. So once you have your ideas, you start to conceptualize them, you kind of like put them into practice, right? And that's where your intangible assets and IP comes in to protect your ideas. Then the next step, you produce your products and services. And then of course you have the salespeople to help you to go and commercialize or to sell it. So once you get your first bucket of gold or your revenue, you have to think about then how do I actually start to reinvest into my R&D, into getting new products, into coming up with new ideas and processes. So this cycle over here is what we call a very virtuous cycle. And you can see that at every different stage, there will be different people in your organization that will actually be involved in this. So anyone from, let's say when you're coming up with your idea conceptualization, you will need your product development, your R&D guys. You will need your marketing folks to come in to say, how do we market this new revolutionary product? When you start to come up with products and services, you need your BD team, you need your legal to actually support to how do I push this into the market. When you start to commercialize, is it only just yourself that you're going to sell your product? Are you going to be working with, let's say, a JV partner, a franchisee, distributor, and so on and so forth? And then, of course, once you have your revenue, then the reinvesting into it, then that's where the whole R&D process comes back again. So it's very important for you to understand that for innovation, it cannot be a single linear line. It doesn't start and stop. For your business to continue to thrive, you have to keep going into this circle and plowing back the money into generating new ideas. So this vehicle that actually brings your ideas into your products and services and coming back with revenue and coming back to ideas again is your intangible assets as well as IP. So IP is actually the vehicle that actually helps you to connect all these different dots together. Right, even though I have spoken quite a fair bit about the importance, right, of IA and IP, we did find that, within Singapore companies, and this was actually a report that we did sometime back in 2018, and we found that actually close to 46% of the local Singaporean companies, they have an incomplete protection of their intangible asset. The next gap that we found is that there's a lack of knowledge in 25% of them, and then of course, some of the necessary steps they actually need to take before they embark into a new market, for example, freedom to operate searches and so on and so forth. But really the most glaring part or the gap that we saw is that there's actually an incomplete protection of the intangible assets. Okay, so then how do we make sure that everything that we have within a company is going to be adequately protected? So I'm going to introduce you to this framework that we have, which is actually called the MAD Growth Framework. Okay, so MAD for short. So instead of just sitting around trying to figure out what kind of IA or IP you have in a company, we've come up with this kind of like a couple of step process to actually help you to go through the steps. So number one, look at your business model under market. Okay, so what are your products, what are your services, and what's actually your delivery model? And we can take a look at this first as, just to make things a bit simpler. Start with one single product or one single service first. Identify that. Once you go through the full steps, then you can go back again to the beginning to say, okay, this is my second product, my second service. So what are they? So try to identify the products and services one by one first. So when you say deliverable, it means that, how is this being delivered to your customer? And then next question to ask is that, who are your customers? And the very easy way to answer this is that, who pays you? Just follow the money, right? So if you are dealing with if you're a company that's actually doing more B2C, then invariably it's going to be your consumers, the direct purchasers of your products and services. If you're more B2B, then of course it's going to be other companies. If coming back to, say, the example of the mask, right? So your face mask, do you actually sell to, other retailers such as supermarkets? If that's the case, if that's the bulk of your channel, then I think those are one of your customers. If you're selling direct to the consumers, they can also be your customers. Okay, so you need to understand who your customers are, who pays you, and who makes the purchasing decisions. Right, so next question to ask is that, then who are your competitors? Okay, who actually takes business away from you? And you should define all categories of competitors that actually is addressing the same problem statement as you. Okay, so not just those who with similar products and technologies. Right, so once you have actually identified the competitors, it will then help you define what is your competitive advantage in step number 4. Okay, so why do your customers choose you over your competitors? Okay, and of course, we always come back to these 3 things, right? Cheaper, better, faster. And I think there was a joke that says that you can be only 2 of them and not 3 at the same time. Okay, so if you're cheaper and faster, you cannot be better, and so on and so forth. So if you have all 3, then I think you basically own the universe. Okay, so really, what is your competitive advantages? So what attracts your customers to buy, carry, or approve your products and services? Okay, and of course, this is a very important key thing that you want to understand. Okay, and then finally, on to the drivers. Okay, so what enables you to drive these competitive advantages? So this is where you start to identify the different kinds of intangible assets and IP that actually helps you. So before doing that, you take a look at your competitive advantage. So what allows you to make your products and services cheaper, better, or faster? Is it because you have a fantastic technology? Then when you have the technology, you'll be thinking, okay, do I have the necessary IP protection about it? For example, is it because you have a brand name that sells? Okay, so once you have a brand name that sells, right, no matter what you actually push out, consumers are going to lap it up. Okay, so if it's a brand, do you have the necessary trademark protection for it? Is it you have the necessary networks of distributors that can actually help you to sell very easily? So your product may not be very good, but because it's cheaper, and your network is very good, they can actually help you to sell very easily. So is it your networks? What else is it? Could it be your data and so on? So you have to think about what your competitive advantages are. Then think about what are the drivers that actually allow you to deliver these competitive advantages. Right, so yes, as I said, this is the next step. What are the intangible assets that actually are residing in your enablers? Okay, so I hope that this map growth framework is helpful for you to understand from your business perspective first, what's your market, what's your advantage, and then identifying what's your intangible assets. Right, so very quickly, I talked about earlier on about the different kinds of IP protection and of course the associated cost. So let's take a look at what are we talking about when it comes to cost. Now, for one trademark, let's say just filing a trademark in a single class in Singapore, we are talking anywhere starting from $1,000 onwards. So if you need to file in multiple countries, then you just need to multiply that accordingly. And again, similar to patents, the bulk of the cost will actually go to your trademark attorney. Now, people have asked me, can I file very quickly trademark applications across many countries? There is a way to do this, which is called the Madrid Protocol. So this is actually kind of like a centralized application process where you file through one single application, and you just need to say, okay, I want this trademark application to be filed in US, in China, in Europe, and so on and so forth. So you need to designate the countries that you actually want to have this trademark filed in. And so through the Madrid Protocol, it allows you to do this very quickly. But of course, similar to filing trademarks individually in each country, right? You need to multiply the cost accordingly as well. Right, so for patents, one single patent on one single technology, right, could be a process or for a product. You're looking for anywhere between 10,000 to 20,000 Singapore dollars for one single application. And again, bulk of the cost will go to your patent agent or attorney. Similar to the trademark, we also have kind of like something like an international patent application, which is called Patent Cooperation Treaty. Okay, so it again helps you to streamline the whole application process. Now, for copyright, even though I said earlier on that yes, there is no associated cost, the question that people might be asking is that then how do you prove that this is actually your copyright? Okay, so the way to do that is that you have certain repositories, online repositories, where you can, if you have after written down your say your book, your article, you've taken a photo, you've carved the carving, you can take photos or your electronic documents, you can actually upload into different websites. So the one I would recommend is actually WIPO Proof. So WIPO is actually World Intellectual Property Organization. So for them, they are kind of like the UN equivalent of IP. So they have a website which is called WIPO Proof. You can upload your copyrighted materials onto the website. It will give you a timestamp, and then that gives you a proof to say that my copyright existed at this point of time. Okay, so theoretically, you don't actually need to register for copyright, but this is just a fail-safe, good to have step, kind of like a warranty or indemnity you actually want to have, kind of like insurance. So just to make sure that you have this timestamp to show people that yes, this actually belongs to me. Right, so very quickly, I just want to also share with you some of the different tools that we actually have from IPOS that actually helps you to file for your different kinds of IP rights very quickly. So IPOS Go is actually an app that we have actually developed. You can download it from Play Store and App Store as well. So on the app itself, you can actually file for trademark registration. Okay, so put in what is going to be your goods or services, what kind of business you're in, and you kind of like recommend you to say, okay, for your particular trademark, we recommend that you file under certain classes. So class 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. And then it'll give you an estimation of the cost. Once you put it in, it will then tell you, okay, the next process is going to be what. So this can be done very quickly in about 15 minutes or so. If your trademark is going to be an image or a logo, you can also take a snapshot of that, upload into this app. It will tell you whether there are similar logos that have actually been registered with IPOS. Okay, so this app, lifesaver, very helpful in helping you to get trademark applications very quickly. Now, so for those of you who are more into technology, and patents might be important to you, right? You want to bear in mind that actually for patent applications, they can take a very long time to run. So what do I mean by that? Patents, when you first file, it will take anything from 3 to 5 years for it to get approved or allowed. So in this 3 to 5 year process, you are in what we call a pending state. So if you are a startup, that might be something that's very difficult for you because you don't even know whether it exists in the next year or not. So having a 3 to 5 year pendency period to you might be very challenging and very hard to also tell your investors. So in Singapore, what we have is actually what we call this SG IP Fast Track. Okay, so it was started in September 2020 last year, and it's going to end in about a year plus time. So because we understand the challenges of fast-moving technologies, you need to have assurance to say that, can I have a patent protection for this? So we have actually this fast track where we can get patents granted in as quick as 6 months. Okay, and then for trademarks in as quick as 3 months, and for registered designs in under 1 month. And the beauty of this is that there is no additional charges. Okay, so it's the same as any normal application. You just need to put in a request to say that I want this to be fast tracked. And of course, there's going to be caveats in there, right? So there's a certain limit in the number of applications we can get in each month. In fact, I think it's only five per month. Okay. So if you are interested to find out more about what this fast track is, take out your smartphone and scan the QR code that you see on the screen. Okay. And if you are expanding into the region in ASEAN, right, the same common problem that we hear from a lot of patent filers is that in ASEAN, you have very, very long patent pendency periods. So through this aspect cooperation, right, which is the ASEAN Patent Examination Cooperation. Each of the member countries in ASEAN have actually committed to say that, okay, if you have certain patent applications which have actually been approved in another country, we will accelerate whatever approval that's required in our country. And also, if your technology is actually in certain Industry 4.0 technologies, they will also fast track the search and examination process for those different applications. And the other thing that I also want to highlight to you guys is that if you have a Singapore patent that's been granted, you can actually re-register it straight away in Laos and in Cambodia. So you don't have to go through the whole application process again in Laos and Cambodia. So Laos and Cambodia, they will recognize a Singapore patent that's been granted and they'll grant it on their site with very, very minimal kind of administrative procedure. Okay, so that's another key point you want to note. Right, so we talked about cost, then of course, naturally you want to see how can I then save some cost in terms of my IP. So just to note that with IRAS, right, for the investment that you actually put into the protection of your IP that you create in-house, for the first 200%, there's actually there's 200% tax deduction for the first 100K that's actually being spent. Beyond that 100% tax deduction after the first 100K, okay? So that's for IP that you actually create in-house. If you in-license IP from another party, right, similar as well, 200% tax deduction for the first 100K and beyond that 100% tax deduction. And if you are starting to go overseas, then you also want to take note that there's this Market Readiness Assistance, which is MRA by ESG. And it actually helps you to defray certain costs, like, you know, if you need to file for a trademark or patent or registered design application in other countries, then this cost can actually be offset. And I believe it's up to 70% of the eligible cost, which is, you know, cost that's related to the registration of different IP rights. It could also be cost related to if you want to draft, say, a franchise agreement, a distributorship agreement, and so on and so forth. These are also costs that can be defrayed. So up to 70% of the cost kept at a maximum of $30,000 per company per new market. Okay. Right. So just want to summarize what we have actually discussed here today. Number one, you need to identify what you have. If you think you have it, classify it. Okay. So not just for tangible assets, but very important for your intangibles as well. You want to assess the relevance to the current and future business. If it's worth it, protect it, okay? So this is in line with when we say IP protection strategy, it has to go along with your business strategy. Now, don't leave money on the table. If you have it, manage it, okay? So same thing for your intangible assets. If there is something lying around, you want to try to monetize it as much as you can. And there's something for every budget. So if you need help, get it. So primarily, yes, IP registration can be costly, but that's where your strategy needs to come in. It doesn't need to mean that everything has to be, you know, a patent, everything has to be trademark, everything has to be a trade secret. You need to adjust your strategy according to where your company currently is and just make use of the resources most efficiently. Okay, I'm just going to share with you two final slides on some of the resources that we have available. And again, if you have your smartphone ready, right, just take it out and scan on the QR codes. So a lot of the things I talked about here today, because it's just a very short 1 hour session, can be quite overwhelming. So if you are interested in finding out more about what is it that IP and IA can be used in your business, right? We have a series of a total of 15 business guides, starting from the basics of IP protection to, you know, how do you create IP when you collaborate with people? What are the tax implications? How do you value IP when you go overseas, and so on and so forth. So many different scenarios, a total of 15 business guides for the different scenarios that you are in. So you can feel free to download them and, you know, browse through them. They'll give you some nuggets of information and advice in there. Now, if you are the lazy kind like I am, right, again, scan out the QR code, right? You can always arrange for a complimentary 45-minute chat session with us on any of the questions that you see on screen, right? So how do I know whether you have any valuable IP? What are the risks when you go overseas? How do you better manage your intangible assets? If you are facing some kind of infringement issue overseas, right, or even locally, what do you actually do about it? So feel free, book a time slot with us. Just scan a QR code. So it's just a calendar where you can actually book either myself or I think another one or two of my colleagues' time. We'll be happy to get on the call and have a chat with you for 45 minutes. Okay, so fully complimentary. So don't hesitate to actually book a slot. All right, and with that, I think we are just going to close this presentation. So my name is Eric. It's been wonderful to share with you my thoughts and experiences, and I hope it's been useful to you. And then thank you again for your attention, and again for IES Inca for inviting me to speak to you. And I think I'll now pass the time over back to Andy.
Thank you, Eric. Yep, that was a really awesome presentation. I think I've like sat through a express IPIA class this afternoon. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that. Got some questions here. Okay. Stephen Choi has got a very practical question. You know, tech startups, limited resources in money and talent. How can they take practical steps to uncover and protect their IP? Maybe you can unshare the slide. We can see.
Sure.
Everybody. Yeah. And feel free to turn on video. Let's have a chat, you know, and try to learn. Yeah.
Okay, so Stephen, your question, right? Yes, we fully understand that for startups, you have very, very limited resources. And what we have actually seen across the years is that, interestingly, a lot of investors are now looking and asking for, you are a startup, what are your intangible assets? And they are actually quite ready to help you in this process because they know as well that if you can't articulate and you can't identify your intangible assets to them to invest in you, they also have a question mark to say, what do you actually have? So we have actually seen that, you know, for investors, they are helping the startups to say, okay, you need help in this aspect. We are going to help you to say, for example, file your first patent, and they're going to give you the grants for that. So that's what we have actually seen. So apart from getting the funds to actually do this, the next thing is also that there are many different strategies, and it's not always going down to patents because yes, you can be a technology company. It doesn't mean that you always have to file for a patent. If there are certain things out there and you find that after filing a patent, you also need to have to think about the next step, which is you have a patent, do you have the necessary ammunition or firepower to go after people that infringe on your technology? If you don't, then you can think about within your technology, are there certain areas in it which I can keep as a trade secret? Because trade secret, basically, protection is free. As long as you don't divulge your information to anyone, nobody knows about it, you can keep it secret. And it also makes it such that whoever that needs to, you know, use this technology has to come to you, and only you have the necessary knowledge to be able to, you know, use this technology. So it's not always, even if you have technology, it's not always just about patents. It can be a trade secret play as well. And again, back to the point about layering of the different kinds of IP, right? Your product itself is not just technology. That's going to be your brand name and so on and so forth. And all these things, you just need to take one step at a time to say, which is your immediate market? Is it Singapore? If it's Singapore, let's do Singapore first. Don't need to go and look at the whole world. Slowly. So one step at a time. So again, going back to the MAT framework, right? You just need to understand first, what are your key products? What are your selling points? Who are your competitors? And then identify where are the areas you actually need protection for. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience here? Yeah. Maybe I'll ask, you know, from a budget point of view in running my business, how much should I allocate towards, you know, IP management? 10%, 5%? Yeah.
Wow, that's a very challenging question, I must say. Because if you recall the slide that I shared about the smartphones, right? Each smartphone you're talking about intangible value actually contributing to close to 40%. So if the value of your intangible asset can contribute 40% to your business, right? Do you think that you want to actually put in 40%? I'm not sure. So that's a very difficult to answer question. But I would say identify what are going to be the key things first. What is your most important for you to 摊价啦? Once you have that, then apply the necessary ones. So start with, you know, at least the local market first. If it's not your local market, that's your key concern, then what's going to be your overseas market that's going to be the most important for you. Then look at it at the very market view first. So each country at a time.
Yeah. Okay. I think MNCs and bigger companies do spend a lot more on this kind of things, right? Compared to the newer companies.
Definitely. So actually, Andy and myself, we used to be from HP, right? And HP back in the days, actually the logo had the word invent in it. And I was part of the IP management group. And back in those days, I think HP, easily you're talking about having at any point of time, 40,000 live patents. So if you think about it, each patent costs you about $10,000 to $20,000 to have, right? You multiply that by 40,000. So that's the kind of cost you're looking at. And it's only just for patents. We haven't even talked about the other kinds of IP rights. So yes, they do have the resources, and a lot of times they also will file for technologies which are actually not key to them, but they will actually license it out or even sell it to other parties as well. So that's another business model altogether. So you're creating IP for the sake of selling it. So it's a bit like your NFT these days, right? Artwork that's actually being sold online for millions of dollars, and is there actually a real physical thing to it? No, it's just a gift, and of course, the blockchain that actually goes behind it.
Right. Okay. Any other questions you guys might have? Are there any courses in IPOS that the innovators can take up to learn about how to manage their IP better? Yeah.
Yes, plenty of courses, anything from half a day to, if you want to really consider about, even joining the IP ecosystem, right? We have a 2-year part-time master's program with SUSS. That's called a Masters in IP and Innovation Management. If you are thinking about even, for example, to become a patent agent, that's also the course you need to take. And I think the resources I can probably just go to iposinternational.com. You'll find that we have a whole listing of courses over there on a calendar basis. Yeah, so anything from half a day to 2-year kind of program, we have that available.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I feel sometimes there's a gap in the market because there's these providers that do the registration or that, but the people that guide you to this process, maybe the map analysis is, I think, so important. And I think if I do myself, I'll definitely miss out a lot of things. We need experienced people to do that. Net process. Is that net process trademarked by IPOS, is it?
As you can see, this is in relation to the earlier question from, let me see, who was it? From Boon Kim, right? So it's actually TM. So we have actually not registered the macro framework as a registered trademark yet, but we are using it actively. So the TM there is just to tell you that we are using it, but not registered.
Is that something that IPOS came up with?
Sort of. Okay, like I wouldn't say it's kind of like rocket science. It's just that we felt that if we started from the business part of the house, right, it makes it a lot easier for you to then understand where are your key IA and IP. Because otherwise, if I just go in and say, okay, tell me what your key IA and IP is, you'll be kind of like struggling also. It's like, where do I actually start? So I think that framework is kind of like, with consultation with a lot of different companies we have done in the past, we found that with this framework, it's easy to guide them to go through the whole process. So this is kind of like through a bit of trial and experience as well.
Yes, very useful. First time I see it presented that way. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from the audience? If not, we might probably wrap up for today already. This is your chance. We have Eric to answer them if you have any questions at all. Yeah. Anybody?
I mean, if you guys are still, I know it's a lot to absorb in 1 hour, so sometimes this is a bit of a brain freeze moment. That's fine. And again, as I shared earlier on, we do have the complimentary 45-minute IA chat sessions, right? So if any questions come up along the way, you want to have someone to chat to, feel free to just book a time with us. Then we have a chat about what your questions might be.
Eric, maybe a quick question here.
Yes, hi, Stephen.
Hi. I want to know, for example, in valuing, we talk about technology company valuation of intellectual assets, right? Forms a key element or key part of the value, right? The value of the company. So what is the way, or is there any suggestion as to how do you value intangibles?
Very
It's a
good.
big topic, lah. And I know it's a big topic. Yeah. So sorry
Very,
to.
very good question. Very good question. And that's something that I would have to be very honest to say that, within IPOS itself, we are also looking at it in a very focused manner. So just to share with you, for IPOS, we have this next 10-year plan, which is called the Singapore IP Strategy 2030. And actually, valuation is actually one of the key points that we have actually identified, because we know that valuation, especially for intangible assets, there's no common standard or framework. There are your common methods of valuation, market, income approach, and so on and so forth. It's just that different people will apply very different, for example, royalty rates and so on. So we want to make it such that it's a bit more standardized, so that, if valuer A comes up with valuation, we bring it to, valuer B. They will also agree to say that, yes, this is a fair method of valuing. But right now it's a bit unregulated in a sense. So different valuers will have very different ways. So do bear with us. We are trying to come up with a more systemic kind of a framework such that it can be agreed not just within in Singapore, but also outside of Singapore as well. So the starting of the framework will then help us to say that once we have this valuation in place, you can bring it with more confidence to different investors and say that this is based on a certain international standard. And that's why this valuation is going to be accurate. So right now, don't have a fixed way or method to say that what is going to be correct or wrong. So hopefully with this new standard coming out, that can actually help companies like yourself to have that in place.
Okay. Because in our training as a valuer, we look at certain things. For example, in valuing intangible, there's a few methods, right? A market approach, the income approach. Then within the income approach, there's always another three method, right? The meme approach, the relief from loyalty, and so forth. So I'm just wondering, do you have any data, as in what kind of valuation can you ascribe to certain companies? Like, for example, Coke, we know that this brand already worth billions of dollars, right? If you strip off everything, Coke itself is worth billions, right? You strip off all the factories and everything, Coke is worth billions of dollars. So how can Singapore company also grow in their own valuation through trademark, through patents, and we must have a way to measure it somehow, right? So that's where
Yes. Thanks, Stephen. And probably I would say this is a good segue for me to also kind of like sell the training courses that we actually have. So we are coming up with IP valuation training course starting sometime in January next year. So the course itself will be talking into a lot more details about the valuation of intangible assets. And if you are interested in finding out more about, for example, specifically the valuation of patents, right? We do have this program, which is called the Certified Patent Valuation and Analyst. So the next run, I think, is sometime in the middle of November. And that particular program is specific only looking at, the valuation of patents. It's actually being funded by SkillsFuture. So if you apply for that particular program and you are eligible for the SkillsFuture for study awards for IP funding, right? The cost is basically zero. Yeah, so just these two courses that if you're interested in, I can send you more information later on.
Thank you.
Sure.
Wow, that's a very attractive proposition. Okay, I think we have a very good discussion here. And I think Eric has shared really a lot of information, a lot of resources